Class 81 in the Golden Doves, page 44, top of the page. I and you alone participate in the act of speech and express subjectivity. So you have three persons in grammar. You have the first person, you have the second person. So what my father is saying is that the first and second persons, they're the ones who are alive, as we said, speech is living, because they're the only ones who participate in the particular discourse, right? And therefore the I and the you, those two personal pronouns, they express the subjectivity of those people participating in the discourse. The third person is excluded from the act of speech, but the third person, he, she, they, them, they're not part of the discourse, right? So they're technically not persons, right? It only expresses impersonal language, right? It's impersonal in the sense that they cannot participate in the discourse, or they're not participating in the discourse, and therefore they're not persons, because person by definition is he or she who participates in the discourse and therefore can express their subjectivity. But the third person by definition is not expressing his subjectivity. The dialectic basis of person, dialectic in the sense that there's two opposing persons who variously take the role of first or second person, right, is explicit in the Arabic and Sephardic nomenclature of the personal pronouns. So if you look at the nomenclature used for the personal pronoun, you see the idea of the subjectivity of the first and second person expressed. Namely, the first person is designated the speaker. In Hebrew it's called medaber. So look at this. In English you say first person. In Hebrew you say medaber. Medaber means he or she who is speaking, right? So you see how the idea of person in Hebrew as a subjective entity participating in discourse is explicit in the terminology used to describe the first person, medaber. In Arabic it's al-mutakalimu. That means he who speaks. The second person, the addressee, is nocheach. So you notice how you refer to second person? He or she that is present. They must be present for the first person to be speaking. So they are present, not just in the abstract, passive sense of being here like this chair is here. Nocheach means here, receiving the communication of the first person. So nocheach in the sense of part of the discourse. So again, when Hashem says, Anochi Adonai Elohecha, Anochi, the chaf of Anochi, represents the second person. So I'm speaking directly to you and inviting you to be part of this discourse. That's the chaf. You could have said Ani, but it says Anochi. So you see how that's the idea of discourse and nocheyach, right? So the second person is the addressee, al-mukhatabu. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing the Arabic right, but in Hebrew it's nocheach. And the third person, who as we said is not really a person, because a person is only he or she who participates in the speech and therefore has an opportunity to express their subjectivity, is called the nistar, the hidden person. They're there, but they're not nocheach, because they're not part of the speech, they're not part of the discourse, and they have no subjectivity. So they're hidden. They're hidden in the sense that maybe there is some person there, okay, but because they're not part of the discourse, their internal self is hidden, right? Nistar. Benveniste showed that the symmetry among the three persons found in normal Indo-European languages, far from representing a fixed and necessary type, is an anomaly at the very center of languages. So in English, you have, for example, I ate breakfast. You ate breakfast. He ate breakfast. I just did past tense. First person, second person, third person. I ate breakfast. She ate breakfast. He ate breakfast, right? She and he are the third person, right? But I skipped the second person. You ate breakfast. You notice how in each one of these cases, there is no inflection of the verb that indicates first, second, or third person, but rather there's a symmetry in the verb inflection. Let's go to Hebrew now. Ani achalti. Arochat boker. I ate. Achalti. Ata achalta. So it switches from ti, the verb inflection, to ta. So you see how in the verb inflection, you distinguish between the first and second person. Ani achalti. Ata achalta. Hu achal. So you see the verb inflection for the third person is completely different. Now, if you look at the triliteral root of to eat is alif kaf lamed. So in achalti, I add the ti to the verb. That inflection indicates first person. Achalta, you ate. I add the ta to the verb to indicate second person. Hu achal. There is no inflection because he's hidden. So it's just those three letters of the root. But this that you have in Indo-European languages such as English, where there's a symmetry between first and second and third person. Well, that symmetry suggests first, second, and third person are the same. But Ben-Venista points out that symmetry which you have in Indo-European languages is actually an anomaly. So what you have in Hebrew actually makes more sense, right? But this anomaly is at the very center of languages. The third person states a predicate about something or someone, but it is not a person, right? So when you, let's say in Hebrew, let's go to Hebrew, hu achal, right? Hu achal, I'm stating something about the third person, right? So I said that he ate. That's the predicate, is the act of eating, or hu yashan, he went to sleep, right? Or he was sleeping. So again, I'm stating something about the third person, but he's not really a person. The third person is not a person. It is really the verbal form whose function is to express the non-person. So, for example, it's the non-person, it's just the verbal form, because as I pointed out, the three letters of the root in the first and second person have an additional letter or letters to indicate the existence of the person. But here, because in Hebrew, the third person doesn't exist, you don't have that additional inflection, right? So the third person is not a person. You see how in Hebrew it works perfectly. In English, no. It is really the verbal form whose function is to express the non-person. The third person will be best understood as the absence of person and of linguistic subjectivity. The absence of person, there is no linguistic subjectivity, and by person we mean a subject or an individual who can express his internal subjectivity and externalize that internal subjectivity with words to a person who's willing to listen and in turn express his or her internal subjectivity to the person who is now speaking, which is the first person. So we're going to read a little more about this in the future classes.